Okay, so we finally return to Kant. We have made time for him, and we can make time this week. Um, I'm really looking forward to it. And one of the reasons that I'm looking forward to it is because I've been engaging with this text now for about 5 years, and it still keeps holding fruit. And I was reading over the text this morning in relation to another class, and the question that came up um, that I think we should focus on and keep in the back of our minds because it ties all the threads that we've been playing around with in the series together is how is it possible to change the world? It's a massive question. It's very big and maybe has multiple meanings. We can think of it in a few different ways. The most immediate way that jumps to mind is in the previous session, we were talking about the grunter at the braai who Dan felt the need to confront. And you might want to ask in that little mundane way whether the interaction between Dan and the aforementioned person might change the world in a significant way. Maybe they would learn to breathe better, or maybe Dan would learn to react to the moment appropriately. And in some significant and meaningful way, the world would have changed for both of them, and perhaps they could go on their merry ways and spread the word wonderfully to each other. That's one sense, how we can change the world maybe ethically or practically. I want to suggest maybe there's another serious way to think about it, and that is a theoretical framework. How can we change the world? Well, what is the world? In order to answer that question, we need to know something about nature. And in order to know something about nature, we need to know something about space, maybe, and perhaps time. And so it brings us back to Sepal's original question of what is time and how can time be inside us? And perhaps maybe how can space be inside us? So the passage that really struck me this morning was from the groundwork where Kant was talking about the purpose of reason. And it's in an argument on about the 11th page where he's arguing against Aristotle's conception of the highest good as happiness. And his argument against that is like, if happiness was the highest good, then nature would have made us in such a way that all our talents and specialities, all of our parts work towards this end. But reason doesn't work towards happiness. It's really bad at it, in fact. In fact, most of the people that reason a lot tend to be very sad. But he says the sympsology, the sort of hatred of reason, wanting to be rid of it out of instinct, is something like a second moment in the self development of reason. It's a sort of laying the stage for ethics and real responsible action to come onto the scene. So I would like to read the conclusion to the critique of practical reason for maybe the North Star that we can keep our eyes on as we work through the theoretical account. And as we think about how we're changing the world in our interaction with others and in our theoretical conception of it, we might also want to think about how Kant has changed the world and what sort of impact he's had on not only the philosophy of his time, but the philosophy of our time as well as the world in general. So here's the conclusion to the critique of practical reason. Two things fill the mind with ever new and increasing admiration and reverence, the more frequently and persistently one's meditation deals with them: the starry sky above me and the moral law within me. Neither of them do I need to seek or merely suspect outside my purview as veiled in obscurities or as lying in the extravagant. I see them before me and connect them directly with the consciousness of my existence. The first thing starts from the place that I occupy in the external world of sense and expands the connection in which I stand into the immensely large, with worlds upon worlds and systems of systems, and also into boundless times of their periodic motion, the beginning and continuance thereof. The second thing starts from my invisible self, my personality, and exhibits me in a world that has true infinity, but that is discernible only to the understanding. And with that world, but thereby simultaneously, or with all those visible worlds, I cognize myself, not as in the first case, in a merely contingent connection, but in a universal and necessary one. The first sight of a countless multitude of worlds annihilates, as it were, my importance as an animal creature, that, after having for a short time been provided, one knows not how, with vital force, must give back again to the planet, a mere dot in the universe, the matter from which it came. The second sight, on the contrary, elevates infinitely my worth as that of an intelligence by my personality, in which the moral law reveals to me a life independent of animality, and even of the entire world of sense, at least as far as can be gleaned from the purposive determination of my existence by this law. A determination that is not restricted to conditions and boundaries of this life, but proceeds to infinity.
So that's the end of the practical reason, the
Mm-hmm.
critique of practical reason.
Mm-hmm.
The critique of pure reason comes after,
Comes before.
comes before. Okay.
So the critique of pure reason, in some sense, can be read, maybe, and I suggest that it might be worthwhile doing, as a sort of stage setting for the critique of practical reason. Somehow,
Okay.
we're going to reconfigure the world and reconfigure the world in such a way as to make acting in it possible again.
That's in the practical reason, making acting possible again.
That's where the focus shifts to. But I suggest that it's
Okay.
already going on in the critique of pure reason. There's something
Okay.
happening, theoretical stance that's being put forward that might
Sure.
lead to something like that. So I just wanted to put that out there as a sort of
Yeah.
forward,
Yeah.
sort of North Star um, for any ethical Kantians interested in. But the theoretical aspect of it is going to be a reconfiguring or a how to change the world in a different sense. And it's the
Okay.
first of a series of three that Kant sort of completes. So it's the critique of pure reason, then the
Yeah.
critique of practical reason, and then the critique of judgment, which deals with beauty and life last.
Sure. So just check my mapping. It's like the critique of pure reason is Kant waking up from this dogmatic slumber and calling the metaphysics of the past similarly dogmatic.
Yeah.
And then he's, in a sense, uh, limiting reason to its domain, or trying to enumerate what it actually does or can do.
Mm-hmm.
Then after that, he writes the critique of practical reason, which is now uh, he's set up the practical relevance of reason. So what reason can apply to.
Yeah, all this while in between, there's a bunch of random stuff that gets published, like a second edition, a prolegomena, a groundwork to the
Okay.
metaphysics. But all of them are working towards that sort of high point.
Okay. Okay. Um, and then the just taking those three, then the third one is the critique of judgment.
Yeah, which is on beauty and life.
Okay. And in the at the beginning of the critique of pure reason, he he puts it forward that it's a we are, or at that stage, have reached this point at which there's the birth of, what does he call it, judgment, or um
Something
it's
like
a
that.
something like that. This
He he starts off with that line of human reason has the peculiar fate in one species of its cognitions that it is burdened with questions which it cannot dismiss, since they are given to it as problems by the nature of reason itself, but which it also cannot answer, since they transcend every capacity of human reason. So he
yeah,
starts at this like
yeah,
stumbling block where human reason has a kind of knowledge that it finds itself having to ask these questions out of its own nature, but
Yeah.
it also can't answer it because it goes beyond every capacity of human reason somehow.
Okay, okay, right. But I'm thinking of like two general domains there. There's a way in which the like pure material of reason um, is itself outside of um, what what you can, I guess, infer from experience or what comes from experience. Like there's reasoning from experience, and then there's reasoning according to reason. So the the well, I'm missing the two things that I thought I saw. The the first is that okay, so reason can by its own operations set up uh, problems or moves from problems that it itself can't resolve by its operations. That that seems a little bit different to then the other context of what he was calling about as prior practice of metaphysics, which is some kind of, or are those two the same? There's like a limit.
We should
There's a
we
limit
should
to,
maybe
yeah,
do it step by step, right? So I think you're
yeah,
pointing through the whole passage. You're like halfway down already to the metaphysics, the battle of
sure, sure,
in this
yeah,
controversy is called metaphysics. I want to stop and just point something out, and it's not going to be helpful, but it's something that always really confuses me about this first sentence and every first sentence in Kant. He
yeah,
says, human reason has the peculiar fate in one species of its cognitions that it is burdened with questions which it cannot dismiss, since they are given to it as problems, by the nature of reason itself, but which it also cannot answer, since they transcend every capacity of human reason. So just something to think about.
yeah,
The text is titled The
yes,
Critique of Pure Reason, and he says that human reason has the peculiar fate in a species of knowledge, that it is burdened with questions that it can't dismiss. Since they are given to it, given to human reason, as
mm,
problems by the nature of reason itself, is reason
yes,
itself
yes,
human reason? Or does reason itself transcend human reason and give human reason
yeah,
problems? So is it one, this is just a distinction to hold in mind, and I've never been able to suss this out for myself, but it's just something that I want to think about. Is it that the nature of human reason leads it to its own problems? Or is it that human reason is related to reason at large or some rationality in general that gives it its
yeah,
problem from which it can't escape?
yes, yeah. That helps me a lot to that area that I was just kind of stumbling towards now, because then it makes you think like, okay, so there's reason and then human reason. They're different things. Reason is almost being put forward, or human reason rather, is being put forward as a um, or like a flavor or an instance of reason as such. And
Yeah,
thus far, human reason has been given problems by reason as such, which Kant is saying, I'm assuming, and maybe like going a bit forward, is that's what we're waking up from, just the playing around.
yeah, I think so. So like human reason might be thought of as an instance of like rationality in general, like divine reason or something like that, a species of a kind that's been given these problems. And so the text is the critique of pure reason. And so maybe this is one way to take this is as the spanning out of the previous philosophies that lead to this critical break. Um,
Okay, okay,
yeah, and so another way to take it might be that he's doing something else. But let's just keep the distinction in mind because I think it's important to figure
yeah,
out. So it's the critique of pure
yeah,
reason. Later on, the question will maybe arise. Maybe I'm preempting too much, and maybe I'm holding up the discussion. Um, but maybe the question should arise and will arise, what is pure reason and what critiques pure reason?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Seems like anything that critiques pure reason in order to be, I don't know, reasonable would have to
Mm,
itself be reason.
mm,
So either reason must determine itself or reason can't be critiqued. But if reason must determine itself, how can it do
yeah.
so in an unbiased manner, right? Like, how do we find the
Yeah.
criteria with reason to criticize reason?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Let me see if I have the pieces. There seems to be some kind of pure reason that makes itself known to human reason by the problems that it gives human reason. That seems to be that first line. Then the piece that you just brought in now, there's something that critiques pure reason. Now that could either be the human reason or something else, um, or pure reason itself, or like reason critiques itself, or um, I yeah,
Yeah, so I think you've got the basic threads that I've been putting on, but you don't want to conflate. You want to be able to hold them apart and see them together, but not conflate
yeah,
them. So, like, pure reason might be thought of as reason as such, which gives these problems to human reason, but it also might be
mm,
thought of as just human reason. At this first
yes,
line, we're not in, I think this is really the brilliance of Kant in a way. We're not really in a place to determine what reason is. And it should become, you're doing Aristotle's politics with Larry. It should become clearer as the investigation goes on. But at the outset,
yes,
it's nice to have these options in mind because if we come into the text
mm,
just because he's just talking about human reason or he's just talking about divine reason, then I think we lose a lot of the potential worth of the argument because the history that he's coming into contact with um, might have a different account of reason than he's putting on the table or that he's going to
mm,
try and we want to see that account flesh itself out rather than just be asserted from the outset, right?
yes, yes, yeah, yeah. Um, the I'm just wondering of your setup in terms of changing how the world, is it possible to change the world? And both in
Mm.
this, but maybe that's still in the background, just keeping it there. Um,
Yeah, it is.
where,
So
where,
the reason I brought that
yeah,
up, to just interrupt, was also because of the grunter case and what you were talking about the Bri and the person that was grunting and how do you interact and what forces you to interact. So I thought that this question would be particularly apt because Kant is responding to a tradition, right? He's responding to this event in the world that like is going on, and there's something that is causing him to respond to it, and there's gonna be a way in which he responds to it, but none of those are like he's not gonna tell us what he's doing or how he's doing it. But by maybe watching it and reading it, we can get an insight into how to engage with another and how to think through with another and maybe how to change both worlds simultaneously.
okay, sure. So the metaphysical dogmatists are the grunters.
Yeah, who are the dogmatists, by the way?
Yeah, that's a um the I mean something that just resonated at least with my own experience looking around the world at the moment and stuff that's offered online. It's like there was a piece there in the preface about, I think the wording was like, there's people with these uh, or like the all too readily available and accessible programs on the soul and its something, whether it's imperishability or something to that effect.
Sure.
So it's yeah, it's this image of the almost hyper availability of these doctrines, that the people who are sharing them have some kind of assurance about, and are sharing from that position of being assured about it. But that's at least one go at it.
Yeah, maybe we can read a bit further. It'll become a bit clearer. Because I think he has someone very
Got
specific
a
in mind. Thomas?
maybe like a too ready spiritualism. Sorry, sorry.
No, I think that that might be right in some ways, but I think that seeing it as a 280 spiritualism maybe takes away from the vantage point of who he might really be discussing in some sense. Um, so there is this definite spiritual aspect to it, and the dogmatists are the first stage of metaphysics, is what he describes, right? Metaphysics in its first, in the beginning, was dogmatic, and he says that its rule is despotic or something like that, like it was a true despot. Um, and we want to maybe think about not only what the dogmatists do, but who the dogmatists might be and what the relationship of reason to metaphysics to dogmatics is, right? So he started off with this reason has the peculiar fate in one species of his knowledge that it's given these problems by the nature of reason itself, which transcend its nature, and also it needs to answer them. It can't dismiss them. It somehow has this dual relationship to human reason. So we want to maybe let's read the next line. That's fine.
Yeah.
I think Kant is also one of those like De Anima type approaches that we should maybe take, like a line by line by line, because he's very
Yeah.
systematic. Okay.
Rad.
So the next line after we've set up that human reason has these problems is reason falls into this perplexity through no fault of its own. It begins from principles whose use is unavoidable in the course of experience, and at the same time sufficiently warranted by it. With these principles, it rises, as its nature also requires, ever higher to more remote conditions. But since it becomes aware in this way that its business must always remain incomplete because the questions never cease, reason sees itself necessitated to take refuge in principles that overstep all possible use in experience, and yet seem so suspicious that even ordinary common sense agrees with them. But it thereby falls into obscurity and contradictions, from which it can indeed surmise that it must somewhere be proceeding on the ground of hidden errors, but cannot discover them, for the principles on which it is proceeding, since they surpass the bound of all experience, no longer recognize any touchstone of experience. The battlefield of these endless controversies is called metaphysics.
Yeah. That's rad. Say again?
You want to have a crack at it?
At what he's saying.
Yeah.
So the image I kind of have is, and maybe try and be uninfluenced by whatever I've received about what he's written, and his positions, but even in what is conveyed there seems to be something like reason, something like experience, and like the phrasing isn't really clear about, it's not really like chicken and egging the situation. It's like, yeah, somehow in the interaction between the two, these principles emerge by which reason operates, and then reason can come to kind of reflect on those principles, and there's this almost like tendency towards higher and higher principles. In that tendency, there's the danger of a kind of removal, or a removal from what I was saying as experience there. A removal of what? Maybe like removal of relevance or applicability, or I'm not too sure. And then the sense that I have of the way that the metaphysics that he's talking about gets framed in this instance is as being, as kind of locking itself into a realm of determination from principles that are, I've been trying to avoid the word abstract, abstracted from experience. But then there's a peculiar thing where he says, but they somehow are quite agreeable to common sense, or quite understandable to common sense. But metaphysics is taken to be this domain where principles are playing with principles in some kind of way.
Yeah. So maybe I'll try and give you an example, and I hope that it helps. Because with Kant, it's helps, and it's sometimes easy to get caught up in the abstract thoughts that are going on. Think about it ordinarily, right? Where does human reason start? Oh, I don't know. I see the match and then the flame. And I ask, how did the fire come from the match? And then, I walk around a little bit and I see some other stuff going on. I wonder, how did the river come from the stream? Or, why does it why does it happen that when I drink water I feel quenched or something like that? All of these very mundane, almost childlike questions. Like, I just imagine a child walking around and just like being like, "What's that? What's that? What's that?" And then like through this process of like childlike asking, at some point, you maybe you ask, "What's this?" and "What's that?" and then at some point you turn around and you go, "What's this?" Maybe like, "What am I?" and "What am I doing here?" Like. It's been all these years reasoning. I guess I'm the one reasoning. What on earth is reason, maybe, right? And I don't know, maybe you wonder about that a little bit. And you might give a mundane answer. I'm a human being. What's a human being? It's an animal. It's got a body like all the other animals. It's got skin and face and hair. It goes to work in the daytime and sleeps at night. I don't know. These are all the sort of contingent empirical things that we do that you can observe about human beings, right? But then you might ask something like, is that really all I am? Like, do I subsist through all these changes? What happens when I die? Am I some sort of immortal soul that lives on forever? And does that have anything to do with the way that my knowledge relates to the world, maybe? Someone like Plato might suggest that our immortality has something to do with our ability to recollect and to apply knowing to the world or something like that. Or, it might have different uh, consequences. It might be something more Cartesian, like I am somehow connected through the body with my pineal gland or something like that. Or else that's been around in Spinoza sort of, I am an expression of God in a certain mode. God's two modes of expression are thinking and extension, and they both reflect each other perfectly, but they run parallel to one another, so they never interact, really, from what I remember. So there's all these like really big questions that start off from maybe this very small question. And you might want to say, well, Hadley, the soul example is ridiculous. We don't just turn around and ask about the soul. But what about, I don't know, we ask about the match and the flame and the water and the river and the grass and the animal. And we ask something stupid like, what's the world? Right? Is the world, has the world always been there? Right? From eternity to eternity? Or was there some sort of big bang that took place and then brought it into being? Does the world have a first cause, or is it just something that it exists in and of itself? Or, does the world have, you can think of modern science as a great example, right? We start off by looking at all these forces and stuff and interactions, and then they ask something like, does the world have smallest parts? I mean, they don't ask it in such a metaphysical way, but when they look for atoms, they surely are asking something of a metaphysical nature, right? Is the world divisible into small parts? And is there a smallest part to the world from which the rest of it is
Mm.
composed? Or is there no smallest part in the world? And is everything not composed or something like that? These might be some of the
Mm.
questions that, um, and science might come close or dangerously close to metaphysics when it does those things. Cosmological arguments about the beginning of the world have been put forward in metaphysics, and the Big Bang Theory seems to be a sort of cosmology. Uh, you might want to ask whether these are the types of questions that can be answered within the domain of experience. Because how do we check that our principles align with experience? What do we do? Right?
Yeah, yeah. Go to experience.
Yeah, we observe, right? We look
Yeah,
and listen and
yeah,
touch and taste wonderful things. But you might want to wonder if you can see the beginning of the world,
yeah.
or you can see the smallest atom, um, or whether you can see the soul or God or any of those
Ah,
things that
yes.
come
Yeah.
into in a field like metaphysics. So we start off from this very mundane question
Mm.
asking, reasoning, maybe, might be the Kantian way to put it. And over a period of time, once we come to sophisticated enough questions, uh, the questioning becomes transcendent, maybe, might be the word to use, and it goes beyond the bounds of experience. We start to ask questions about first cause of the world or first cause of experience and God and
Mm.
all of these things that don't seem to fit into the framework anymore. And you read
Mm.
that, you were talking about that passage about sound common sense. He said they seem so unsuspicious that even sound ordinary common sense agrees with them. Um, you might want to wonder if
Mm.
you like playful there. Like they seem so obvious that even like common people think they're right. And like that might be good evidence for them on the one hand, but terrible evidence on the other hand, because like ordinary common sense gets a lot of things wrong. And one of the things that it might be getting wrong is how we can know anything about these transcendent objects from the world. And not only how we can know anything, but how we can check whether our alleged knowledge or our putative knowledge matches up with anything. Like, what's the, you might want to use the word correspondence here. Like, what do our thoughts about these things correspond to? Are they just
Mm.
figments of imagination? Like, ghosts that we make up after seeing things like the wind blow leaves around? Is the soul
Mm.
something, or is it a reality in some weird usage of the word, which is non-empirical?
Mm.
These are
Mm.
the, you always use the term intellectual heritage, and I've been really taken by it of recent. This is
Mm.
the sort of intellectual heritage that has maybe been left behind for Kant to deal with in some way or another.
Sure. Yeah, um it really struck me again, this idea of like what's it, the Copernican turn or revolution. Like it's so hard to uh, consider something like a change that's significant. It's like, so it's we reasoning about how we related to the sun. Um, and then because reason does this, um, say higher abstraction or movement, it somehow, somewhere, we start to determine or think that no, the sun is not what it does in common experience. It doesn't go around us. We are actually in some way going around the sun. It violates your eyes. You can't check experience for that. And then yeah, sure. That's a monumental shift, and it violates experience, but it's common. Yeah. It's always I guess that's that piece of wonder. Yeah,
The Copernican term is interesting because it violates experience in one sense and then doesn't in another, right?
yeah.
So it violates experience in the sense that our ordinary experience, our immediate sense perception, we see the sun as revolving around us, right? We see it
Mm,
rise, and then we believe that. But as far as I remember, the whole reason for the Copernican term is that the Ptolemaic system has like it's supposed to work in like perfect orbits, and some planets do a loop, uh, like
mm,
retrograde motions, I think. Uh, and so
mm.
retrograde motions allegedly can't be explained on the Ptolemaic account. And so it is sort of observable that we actually do rotate, but it's like almost a very theoretical observation. Uh,
Yes, yes.
so it conflicts with our very common experience, maybe our ordinary understanding, if we want to use that word. And
Yeah, yeah,
it works with our scientific understanding.
yeah, yeah,
And now you want to think, so I think that's really good. And I think we should hold both the tension and the release in it violates our common understanding, but also once we see it, we can't unsee it in our scientific understanding. Like it fundamentally shifts
yes,
the way we interact with the world. And
yeah,
then you might want to think about the sort of Copernican shift in metaphysics, because that's really beyond the bounds of experience.
yes,
So now, like, what is the shift and how are we going to do metaphysics? Um,
yeah,
like, what does it mean to set the planets around the sun in metaphysics? Or
yeah,
something?
yeah. Wow. Okay. I want to bring in your original, the framing there of is it possible to change the world? Because I've been thinking about these like definitions of faith, and I really appreciate your bringing in the um, I don't know how to express it properly. The one way is like for philosophy beginning in wonder, and then also just kind of grounding our determinations here in everydayness thinking. Like that's the exercise of reason. So my what I'm saying now is like kind of following on from that. It's there's this, I think it's in like the book of Hebrews. It's talking about faith as the like the assurance of things hoped for. But so this whole dynamic of the unseen and hope and faith is some kind of relationship with what is unseen. But then there's also this piece that like our ancients or our elders, the ones whom we esteem, were the ones who, by their relationship with what is not seen, made the world that is seen. So it's like, is it possible to change the world? It's this like mediation of what is unseen, and literally the world that then we come to exist in or occupy, the common senseness of it is an inheritance. It has been crafted from what is unseen, so that now like those apparently theoretical determinations are uh, structuring experience in a deeply common sense way. But because they were brought in or um, yeah, sure.
That's really powerful. I think maybe I'm grateful that you brought up the Copernican turn too early, actually, because it might help. I
Yeah.
never framing it in this way. So if it doesn't help, my apologies. But we stick with the Copernican revolution and think about, we've got this metaphysics now. We've come there through this process of reasoning. We have this like childlike wonderment. And so you might want to think about what dogmatism is in relation to the sort of Copernican revolution. So it's the first stage.
Mm,
So you might want to think of dogmatism as the childhood of reason, right? It's just
mm,
reading off the character of things and asking questions and getting answers from what it immediately asks, right?
mm.
And so, I mean, his use of the word despotic is actually very funny. I've never thought about it in the like in terms of children, but children are sometimes a little bit like little despots. They just like run around like destroying things and like ruling their own worlds, and it's very beautiful. But they
Yeah.
are like they are a little bit despotic. It's very cool, and I
What
hadn't
is
thought
a
about it. Yeah.
do you like to find that word? Like give me some more meaning.
Uh, like Thomas might be better. Thomas, are
See
you
that?
here?
Yeah.
A despot is like a dictator or
Yeah.
a.
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah, like children are a little bit like.
Sorry, just to give you the literal translation is master,
Sure,
Okay. Okay.
and it's
Sure.
always pronounced despot, Hadley. Just by the way.
sure. Thanks. I will correct, of course. Anyways, so I don't know. Children are like a bit like domineering in that way, or they can be like once they're at like a certain age, and once they've like figured out certain things, like once they've like learned how their toys work and how like all this other stuff works, they get like really unsatisfied and they just start like breaking stuff and like doing really
Yes.
interesting. But so I'm wondering about, and the way that I was thinking about it in terms of the Copernican revolution is to think about Copernican revolution is the rotating of the sun around the planets. So we might want to ask the question, in metaphysics, what's the sun and what's the planets? Or who is the observer
Mm.
and what?
Yeah. 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 Potent frame. Um, the the I just want to add something on the dogmatism, like um, because that developmental so you're saying like maybe it's the childhood of reason. But then I was also thinking of almost like the function of dogma almost as this settling, like a kind of settling of the scene so that it can function in terms of the world space that has been settled by the conquest of reason, to phrase it in a particular way. Um, but I guess I guess I'm saying the same thing there, but it just struck me a little bit differently, thinking like what the function of dogma almost, because it's almost habitual to hear that word in a bad way. It's like to not be dogmatic or
What makes the? I mean, yeah, picking up on that negative connotation. Maybe I'm also jumping the gun here, but what makes the first? I'm going to assume here he means the first philosophers, like the pre-Socratics, Plato, Aristotle, all the way up to Aquinas and people in the early modern period. What makes them dogmatic?
You want to answer your own question?
Sorry,
You
what
want to
makes
try? You want to try answer your own question?
you said?
Were you there for the framework that we said? So
I missed a lot of that. I had to go. Sorry.
well, so first,
Oh,
I'll set the framework up again, and then I'll maybe ask you the question because I think it's the right question to be asking. I think that's exactly who he has in mind when he's talking about dogmatics. So the framework is human reason has the particular fate or the peculiar fate that in one kind of knowledge, it's burdened with a set of problems by its very nature that go beyond reason beyond experience, which it can't answer, but also can't dismiss, right? And so the framework that I gave was because Kant says that reason falls into this peculiarity of no fault of its own. It starts off in ordinary experience and then transcends higher and higher and higher until it can't check its results against experience anymore, right? So I gave the framework of a child will ask a question like, why does striking the match cause the flame, or why does the stream flow into a river? And then from there we'll ask increasingly larger questions until it comes to big questions like, what is the world, or what is the soul, or is there a first cause of the world? Something like we might think of like God or something like that.
Okay.
And so what did previous philosophers do in respect to that subject matter, in respect to metaphysics?
They assumed a first principle, or they, as far as I can tell, they assumed a first principle. Or they assumed that, well, Aristotle certainly assumed that we could do metaphysics.
Yeah, good. And what does metaphysics deal with? What's the planets and the sun, or to use
First
principles of what?
Or things that lie behind individuation. Things like sorry, am I just prevaricating here?
I think both you and Dan, and it's a common thing to do when faced with these questions. I think you're overthinking. I'm looking for like a simple answer, but it's one of those simple answers that's like maybe just so right that it's hard to say. Do you remember what Aristotle opens up the metaphysics talking about?
All philosophy begins in wonder.
Yeah. Maybe a few chapters.
The proof of this can be seen in the delight that we take in the eyes, for through this many distinctions are known. That one.
Okay, so that's where he begins the metaphysics. I'm thinking of maybe a much later chapter where he talks about being. And he's being spoken of in many ways. And so I guess maybe the answer, I'm a bad teacher. I always give away the answers. The answer that I was looking for was metaphysics deals with being and the first principles of being, right? I don't know which one is the planets or the sun because it's really hard to tell because they're gonna flip in a second. But
yeah, well,
say that being the sun, which sounds very close to a certain account of the good and the sun that we might want to consider. And we might want to say that metaphysics deals with being and assumes that its first principles can give it access to being in some way, or has assumed.
Okay.
So reason can determine immediately from some sort of like.
There's a kind of circularity, isn't there?
Maybe.
Or at least possibly.
What's the circularity you're pointing to?
The first principles, you arrive at the first principles.
I mean, first principles are always kind of weirdly circular. I'm not sure it's an issue that we should get into at the moment, right. But I think you are right to raise the sort of past history as philosophy as sort of dogmatics. You went up to like Aquinas, right?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, and then everything after that kind of just, you can get a bit complicated.
Yeah, what's the everything after that? What's
well,
the second?
I mean, I think it's Descartes 100 years before Kant, isn't he? Descartes and Leibniz and Spinoza. So, I mean, if he's skewering right up into his own.
Yeah, doing the whole history. I would maybe avoid including Spinoza in the Descartes camp, but Descartes definitely the next move. And why is Descartes definitely the next move? Do we have the preface with us? Do you want me to read further?
What do you mean? I have the preface in front of me, but I don't know where we are in the preface at the moment.
We're right at the last paragraph, the last two paragraphs of page 99. It's just below the battlefield of these endless controversies is called metaphysics.
Yeah, time was when metaphysics was entitled to the queen of all sciences. So is that have we read that yet?
You can read that, and then we'll stop and think about it for a little bit, and then you can probably read on to the stages of reason.
Time was when metaphysics was entitled. entitled to the Queen of all Sciences, and if the will be taken for the deed, the preeminent importance of her accepted tasks gives her every right to the title of this honor. Now, however, the changed fashion of the time brings her only scorn. The matron outcast and forsaken, she mourns like Hecuba, Monde maxima rerum tot generis. Okay, I actually can't read Latin, so I'm just going to leave that. Her government, under administration of the dogmatists, was at... Sorry, must I stop?
Yeah, let's just quickly talk about that. Also, the translation apparently of that line from Ovid, I don't know, or Ovid, I have no idea.
It could be, yeah, oh, okay, this is Ovid, the Metamorphoses, okay, yeah.
Yeah, it's the translation is greatest of all by race and birth. I now am cast out powerless. It's not important for the argument. It's just a very pretty line, I think.
Yeah,
yeah.
Right.
So yeah, at some point metaphysics was the queen of science, and if the will was taken for the deed, it deserved the title on the importance of its object. So somehow it dealt with something that was very important, which is all we need to get from that line, I guess. But it was just a pretty
fundamental reality. Yeah. Oh, government, under the administration of the dogmatists, was at first despotic, but insomuch as the legislation still bore traces of the ancient barbarism, her empire gradually, through intestine wars, gave way to complete anarchy. And the skeptics, a species of nomads despising all settled modes of life, broke up from time to time all civil society. Happily, they were few in number, and were unable to prevent its being established ever anew, although on no uniform and self-consistent plan. In more recent times, it has seemed as if an end might be put to all these controversies, and the claims of metaphysics receive final judgment through a certain physiology of human understanding, that of the celebrated Locke. But it has turned out quite otherwise. For however the attempt be made to cast doubt upon the pretensions of the supposed queen by tracing her lineage to vulgar origins in common experience, this genealogy has, as a matter of fact, been fictitiously invented, and she has continued to uphold her claims. Metaphysics has accordingly lapsed into the ancient time-worn dogmatism. And so again suffers that depreciation from which it was to have been rescued. And now, after all methods, so it is believed, have been tried and found wanting, the prevailing mood is one of weariness and complete indifferentism, the mother in all sciences of chaos and night. But happily in this case, the source, or at least the prelude, of their approaching reform and restoration. For it at least puts an end to that ill-applied industry which has rendered them thus dark, confused, and unserviceable.
Cool. Yeah, so that was a lot. And what translation are you using? The Lewis Whiteback?
No, Norman Kemp Smith.
I understand why they changed the translation. It's not bad. It's just like maybe less powerful at times. The last line that you read in mine is now after all paths as we persuade ourselves have been tried in vain, what rules is tedium and complete indifferentism, the mother of chaos and night in the sciences, but at the same time also the origin, or at least the prelude, of their incipient transformation and enlightenment, when through ill-applied effort they have become obscure, confused, and useless. Similar, but a little bit different. I imagine the German different enough to make it more interesting, but what's the basic set of moves that have happened there? Because you went through the whole series.
Yeah, it's nice sometimes to read a whole period. I just read the period. He seems to be sort of suggesting that there's that metaphysics has a, I mean, well, this is what I understand, is a kind of a tendency to be overly imperialistic, but that imperialism is in some sense, while it is in excess, is justified in the face of skepticism. The skeptic is like a nomadic barbarian who destroys and disrupts all kind of settled. He takes away too much, the ability to have knowledge, basically.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So you identify the skeptic with who? Descartes?
Or not Descartes here, but I would go with probably Hume as the most obvious one.
Yeah.
You know,
What about
go all the way back to Pyrrho and people like Sextus Empiricus.
Sure, but what about Descartes is striking compared to maybe Aristotle? What's the difference? Descartes himself is not a skeptic, but he does start from skeptical meditations in the Meditations on First Philosophy, right?
Yeah, he starts in skepticism. Aristotle doesn't start in skepticism.
Good, yeah, why? What's the shift?
Well, I mean, I don't know, are you talking historically here, or what, are we looking specifically at the content of Descartes?
No, just keep in mind what we've been talking about, right? Metaphysics starts off as the sort of queen of science. What's its object? Being. And what does it do?
Forgive me, but he seems to be suggesting that title keeps getting challenged, and it seems to fall down and then get put back on, and then fall down and get put back on and fall down.
What's the falling down? The second stage of the battlefield.
That's skepticism's ascendancy.
So what is it doing? How does skepticism even challenge dogmatism?
Usually, I would imagine by challenging the connection between subject and object, so that we can't have knowledge.
Okay, say that in another way, maybe.
Perceiver. Sorry?
In the way that I've been saying it.
Are you Larrying me? Don't Larry me.
I do try to set up technical terms for a reason.
Okay.
I mean, the perceived is really worthwhile for talking about. So what happens in the perceiver-perceived relationship? What's the introduction to Descartes' meditation, Tom? You wanna give us the
did it recently.
What happens to him?
Yeah, he realizes that his beliefs are based on faulty premises.
What are the faulty premises that his beliefs are based on?
Well, he isn't, as far as I can tell, he isn't specific about which ones are false, but he seems to be quite general about which beliefs are subject to his skepticism.
Man, you guys really, I told you I didn't take your copy of the Meditations up with me, Tom, and I told you I would need it, but I don't have it on me. Descartes starts out from the senses, right, and begins to doubt that his sense experiences correct his thinking. And he does so because of illusions, which are going to be an important theme, maybe that we'll bring up later. And the illusions that you might want to think about are the obvious ones. Straight sticks in water appear bent, right? You ever seen those? Pretty cool. And I don't know. The planets appear small when actually they're large. Maybe
Yeah.
the sun appears to revolve around the earth, but it doesn't. All these weird sense experiences that are really counterintuitive to what our understanding tells us about the way that like reality works, right? As you said, it's kind of disorientating to think about going from the common sense experience of seeing the sun rise and set to seeing us moving around and around or something like that, right? So Descartes starts, he then goes on to, like, he says that that's not enough, and then he goes on to like the harder cases of the madmen in the hospital, and then he goes to the most obvious sense certainty that we can have, which is staring at our hands in good lighting. And he says something like, but even that is subject to doubt because I've had dreams where I've been staring at my hands before. How do I know that this is not just all a dream, right?
And then he moves to the evil demon, I think.
Yeah, that's later, and that has like several hundred more complexities in it that I don't want to get into. But Descartes' tight. Descartes' like really, really powerful, and I think we don't give him the time of day anymore because he says some weird stuff maybe in chapter 3. It's very cool. And that beginning, that opening of the meditations is very powerful. So what's happening there, right? Reason starts from principles and experience and gets to something that transcends any experience, right? And then we immediately read off the character of that stuff. But what happens when we take away the sort of certification that experience can stamp on things, right? Skepticism seems to remove the very sort of certainty that experience provided in the first place. So no longer can we just read off the character being. No longer can we just say that the sun doesn't rotate, that the earth doesn't rotate around the sun or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But now we're sort of stuck. We are in a sort of skeptical position. Like we can't read off the character of being. Being still appears, maybe. I mean, stuff still is, I guess. And you might want to ask the
Yeah.
question, what on God's green earth do we do with this? And there's a third stage that you mentioned in the passage that you read, Tom. What's the conclusion that happens?
The reclamation of the crown.
That's like a semi-second stage. They just go back and forth on this battlefield. What's the final stage? The chaos and night.
Oh, the differentism. People just get so sick and tired of the back and forth.
Yeah, who cares, right? Stupid. We shouldn't do metaphysics. Isn't that the general conclusion to jump to after all these years? Hasn't that been the general conclusion we've jumped to after all these years?
That thought has certainly crossed my mind. Something along those lines.
Yeah, right? Why shouldn't it? If they keep fighting it out with no, it's like, I mean, I'm not going to get canceled. I'm not going to say it. If they keep fighting it out, why don't we just, move along? Like, let the metaphysicians do their thing and then carry on with our lives, right? Just stop caring. Who cares about God, the soul, and the world anymore? Right? Those seem like things that nobody does care about anymore. In fact, we might be, which is maybe why I really enjoy Kant, in precisely the state that Kant is describing.
You mean the most indifferent society?
To metaphysics.
To metaphysics.
Indifferent, yeah.
It might be to other stuff as well. I mean, depending on what the relationship between ethics and metaphysics is, or if there is one at all, or, all of those good things. But at least metaphysics, we can say that like nobody cares. And they seem to have good reason.
Nobody gives a flying toss. What difference? Doesn't change the taste of a cup of tea.
So yeah, we got this battlefield analogy. The dogmatists are there, they're chilled, and then like the skeptics turn against them and start fighting against them. And we get sick and tired of it after a while because it's just tiring and boring. And I think you're right to bring in Hume because Hume is the more pertinent skeptic. But I think Kant has skepticism in general in mind, from the ancient skeptics all the way down to Hume.
It's like a theme in philosophy versus another theme in philosophy. There's this kind of DNA within it.
Yeah, so dogmatism is a sort of theme within philosophy that encompasses thinkers maybe from Plato onwards or Aristotle onwards, depending on how you want to think about them. And then skepticism might be a theme from like Descartes onwards. And then
it does.
Now we have.
Sorry, I was just going to say. Yeah, keep going. Sorry. No, I was just going to say it does seem that.
Thomas.
does think that Aristotle's account of knowledge does not deal with skepticism. There, I've said it.
Yeah, sometimes one of the ways of reading the opening of the Meditations is as a sort of overcoming of the Aristotelian flavor that was floating around in the medievals. Um, that's at least once what I read in a translator's introduction. So I'm not sure how much to trust it, but it was there. But yeah, so now we don't care about metaphysics. That's the stage we're at. Um, and Kant calls it the mother of chaos and night in the sciences.
Mm.
I mean, how how much cooler could you get in a page?
Yeah.
We are actually experiencing somewhat of an attack on science at the moment.
Probably. I don't know. I don't know what's happening currently. I'm kind of out of touch.
Well, I mean, just thinking politically, there's the insinuation that it's somehow racial or gendered. That seems to be a product of a kind of skepticism about
I
its
wonder
validity.
if that's the science he's talking about.
I mean, so? I mean, that would be the very obvious sense of science, or the very obviously modern sense, contemporary sense. But then is he? So does he have a more? I was going to say Aristotelian sense of science as disciplined knowledge. Is it wider or narrower?
Maybe you'll have a Kantian sense of science.
No. Really? Really? I wonder why. Why is that, Hadley?
His name is Kant, I guess, and we have to just add sort of 3 letters to make everything sound fancy nowadays. Um, yeah, you might want to think about what science is. It might be an important question.
Mm.
Yeah, what kind of chaos does he actually have in mind here?
The
Does
the
he mean like
battlefield is
no?
how
Does
he
he mean
describes.
like disordering from the a sense of that there's some sort of project behind science, or does he mean something like what I was suggesting, like there's a critique of science as a kind of skepticism of science itself?
Maybe, I don't know. We'll figure it out as we get along. Kant is again one of those great thinkers that puts a lot on the table. Like I think I told you guys when we started that the preface is 7 pages, the A edition, and it reads like 7,000. Kant is one of those thinkers
Mm.
that as we go on. Um, he's still setting up. He's doing the like the dressing work. He's setting up the stage and you know getting the issues out on the table. I'm just trying to help in clarifying some of those issues and thinking
Mm.
about what he's talking about. So let's quickly, because I think it'll be good to maybe end straight after this, if
Yeah.
possible. Uh,
Rad.
let's return to indifferentism, the mother of chaos and night. Is that where he ends the sentence? Do you remember, Thomas?
No, it's not, because I'm actually looking at it right now.
Yeah,
It says,
cool.
but happily this is the case. In this case, the source, or at least the prelude of their approaching reform and restoration. That's the end of that sentence.
Yeah, your translation doesn't do it justice. Sorry. But at the same time, also the origin, now what rules is tedium and complete indifferentism, the mother of chaos and night in the sciences. But at the same time, also the origin, or at least the prelude, of the incipient transformation and enlightenment, when through ill applied effort they have become obscure, confused, and useless. So we've got this mother of night, but it's also the prelude, maybe the birth of enlightenment. You might want to think about the sun again, right? Chaos and night. I don't know. There was a full moon the other day and a solar an eclipse, and somebody was like, "What do you think about why people just go crazy during the full moon? And I was like, this is a ridiculous question, but I didn't think that it was going to come up today when it has, and it sounds great. So think about it, right? Like there was
Yeah.
a full moon the other day, like lunar eclipse, the mother of night and chaos had come onto the scene, and people were just like wilding out. I don't know what they were doing, but they were losing their minds and like doing stuff that they normally wouldn't do. I imagine like a purge-like scenario. But what happens after nighttime? Thanks, Dan.
I
Yeah,
don't know,
that's
because Dan,
crazy.
Dan, did you turn your light off deliberately so that we just see the night? So there's
No,
chaos now.
I did not. That was not deliberate. So
ESCOM's
the sure. Um, I'm wondering if we work by means of the analogy of the planets and the sun, and try and um, maybe that will be like a nice way to try and glimpse it.
Yeah, you might not have to glimpse it. What happens after nighttime?
the dawn.
Yeah, explain.
The sun rises. like, like, I don't know what you want from me. Like, I'm not
Precisely
an
that.
astrophysicist.
And so, what does the sunrise do? What's the
Brings
sunrise?
light.
Yeah, the birth of the
Enlightenment. Enlightenment. Is that the word you're looking for? Aufklärung.
yes. I am looking for enlightenment, Thomas.
Good
So
luck.
different.
That's what I say.
Enlightenment is the sunrise. It's the dawn. You make me want to read Nietzsche more, actually. Anyways,
Mhm.
but so there's this indifferentism, and it's the nighttime, and somehow the setting of the sun that has come before has given it new opportunity to rise and bring something afresh into the world, or to light the world again uh, tomorrow. I've also never read
Mm,
this way, so thanks for bringing up the Copernican term, and thanks for bringing up the sort of
mm,
day stuff. This has been very fun. And I think
mm.
the last stuff, the last thing that we should read is this. The next sentence. For it is pointless to affect indifference with respect to such inquiries to whose object human nature cannot be indifferent.
Which is said at the beginning.
Yeah. Moreover, however much they may think to make themselves unrecognizable by exchanging the language of the schools for a popular style, these so-called indifferentists, to the extent that they think anything at all, always unavoidably fall back into metaphysical assertions, which they yet professed so much to despise. Nevertheless, this indifference occurring amid the flourishing of all sciences, and directed precisely at those sciences whose results, if such are to be had at all, we could least do without, is a phenomenon deserving our attention and reflection. This is evidently not the this is evidently the effect not of the thoughtlessness of our age, but of its ripened power of judgment, which will no longer be put off with illusory knowledge, and which demands that reason should take on anew the most difficult of all its tasks, namely that of self-knowledge, and to institute a court of justice by which reason may secure its rightful claims while dismissing all its groundless pretensions. And this, not by mere decrees, but according to its own eternal and unchangeable laws. And this court is none other than the critique of pure reason itself.
Mic drop.
Yeah, it does sound like quite a momentous project.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. We might want to talk about the indifferentists before the mic drop actually happens, because I said a lot that might be taken in the wrong way as we should get over metaphysics, but I didn't mean it.
Uh,
I was just making a point.
You mean in what you just read or prior?
What I just read. So prior, I was just making a point about indifferentism and how we sort of seem to be at a similar stage where nobody cares about metaphysics. And I was saying that why
Yeah.
should, because there's all this back and forth and it's just easy enough not to care. But what does Kant say about that?
Mm. In what you just read?
Yeah. Does he agree?
The agree with indifferentism? No, it doesn't. It doesn't seem like it. Um,
He seems to
no, it's
dismiss
like
indifferentism.
Dismiss might be the wrong word, right?
move by means of move beyond. Um, there's a the one. I guess the first time I read that by its eternal and unchangeable laws, I was wondering like if that's not like from the position of the indifferentist, like if I'm hearing something like that, I'm getting a little bit turned off because it isn't that um the recurrence of the dogmatist, like
Yeah, so I think that's maybe the wrong way to read that. I've read recently to
yeah
shut down, they're going down the wrong path. It's been difficult to learn. Um,
yeah
I think the eternal laws that he's talking about are an overcoming of indifferentism that is neither
mm,
dogma nor skepticism. He's pointing to some sort of new thing that comes onto the scene. Uh, Kantian philosophy, critical philosophy, maybe.
yeah
Because
yeah
the source of this eternal and unchangeable laws is the court of pure reason, which is the critique of pure reason itself. Um, so he's pointing beyond indifferentism, but I think that it's
yeah
important to see that he's not just dismissing indifferentism. There's a sort of, I want to say, a sort of argument against it, but it's very
okay
slippery and it might be thought to be like some kind of wordplay, but I think it's actually very intelligent. I'll read it
mm,
again. For it is pointless to affect indifference with respect to such inquiries to whose object human nature cannot be indifferent. Moreover, however much they may think to make the schools, however much they may think to make themselves unrecognizable by exchanging the language of the schools for a popular style, these so-called indifferentists, to the extent that they think anything at all, always unavoidably fall back into metaphysical assertions, which they yet professed so much to despise. That's an argument.
yeah
A weird one, but it
yeah
is.
yeah I'm glad you read that again. um yeah, I can't help but hear something of that Platonic all things desire the good, or we cannot help but imply our conception of what the good is in how we act. And there's this kind of critique of the indifferentists as though they might posture an indifference towards a claim on being or a claim about being or an implication of the meaning of being. They inevitably live it out and revert to, and I think that's there's kind of key phrasing in that they like regress or revert back to a metaphysical stance about being. Though,
Uh, just a quick question: has he actually got anyone in mind here?
I assume they'd have people like Reed and the common sense philosophers in mind. I'm not sure. That's
I'm just I would have
that's who you
yeah I
complains
didn't I
about. Sorry. That's who he complains
it
about
was,
the phenomenon
okay.
that Reed and
And I
Beat.
was going to say how else do you how does he define indifferentism? I mean, it says here the mother of all the chaos, when after all methods, so it is believed, have been tried and found wanting, the prevailing mood is one of weariness and complete indifferentism. So it's a position that says skepticism and dogmatism both lead to dead ends. Therefore, we should be indifferent to both.
Yeah, so I think Dan was trying to bring it up, but I think the way that he brought it up might have also obscured what was happening there. So I think you are helping. What is indifferentism? What was my caricature of it? Do you remember?
I'm not remembering yours.
As
Um,
vividly
so yeah, so I kind of maybe compared it to the situation we're in today, where nobody cares about
Yeah.
metaphysics. Like
Yeah, as
we just
Tom was speaking, I was thinking the word nihilism almost feels appropriate.
yeah, it
yeah,
does
maybe
actually.
something.
That's a good connection to make there, Dan.
So yeah, I would maybe also just hold off on nihilism because that might come up later in the development of like putting things out. But regardless,
Mm.
what of indifference, this not caring about metaphysics, what do we do nowadays? Sorry, I'm gonna like not have a place to work because of this, but whatever.
Not have a place to.
To work.
The
Are you gonna get cancelled? Say what you're gonna get cancelled for again, Hadley. I
I'm
want to
not
hear.
Well, think about what do we think about nowadays in philosophy departments? And how do we think about it? We try to avoid as much metaphysical baggage as possible, which means doing what? I don't know. Some tiny piece of like
yeah.
this
Yeah.
We
philosophy.
try and comment on.
Epistemology,
We try and comment on
epistemic
neuroscience,
injustice.
physics, or biology, if at all.
The point that I'm trying to make there is that we do something else. We
Yeah.
we move along. We don't do metaphysics anymore. We do something else. We do, I don't know, philosophy of science, or maybe I don't know, philosophy of race or something like that. All of these are really important, by the way, but the way in which we do them might be problematic if we don't do metaphysics first, according to Kant. At least that's
Yeah.
what he seems to be suggesting. I think on their own
So,
account,
Yeah.
they're all very
yeah.
respectable. But why would they all include metaphysics? So Dan, you said that like there's sort of this like inescapability and this sort of like platonic nature to stuff. I think that might be right in some way, but why on earth should, I don't know, someone that does contemporary cognitive neuroscience um, and takes that to be a philosophy of mind have to do metaphysics? Don't they just have to do the neuroscience stuff?
because they have to make metaphysical claims. They have to say something like the mind is the brain. That every mental property or mental state is the brain.
No, they don't. They can just say I'm studying the brain.
Okay, that's fine, but then you don't move beyond that, and you can't say anything about.
Yeah, of course we can't say anything about it. We can't
Yeah.
do metaphysics.
Can't do metaphysics.
I'm being an antagonist here, if you can't
Of
tell.
course. Hmm.
I
Why
mean,
would we want?
in a say again.
Why
Well,
would we want?
no, because your study would have to be shaped by an understanding of the mind as related to the brain.
No, it doesn't. We can just look with our eyes. We can cut open someone's skull, have a look at the brain, do an fMRI. We got lots of imaging techniques.
Those images, the connection between those and our claims about the mind has to be established in some way through some mechanism, through some method.
Science, Thomas.
Yeah, that science has got to be nested in a wider claim about the world, a deeper claim.
Well, it doesn't. It can change. Revisable.
I have to beg to differ here.
Standpoint epistemology might say something like that, right? Wouldn't it?
Oh, am I a standpoint epistemologist now? Oh dear.
Which again, there's nothing wrong with. I'm just saying that like there are positions that don't care about metaphysics, and maybe they're right.
Hadley the indifferentist.
Apparently,
Hadley the indifferent.
We can't just dismiss
Yeah,
them.
yeah. The
Dismiss the dismissers.
Exactly. We can't just dismiss the dismissers. Dan, what are you gonna say?
yeah. I would try and implicate the dismisser, but I'm not sure how. I would have to know them, relate with them in some way, and
Yeah, sort of grunter question, Dan.
the grunter.
Yeah. How do you help the grunter, right? How do you help the person
Yeah.
that,
Thank God it wasn't a manta.
or how do you know that you're not the grunter in this situation? Just trying to do
Yeah.
metaphysics in this like childlike fashion. Maybe there's no metaphysics at all.
Yeah. Maybe you're the grunter.
Yeah, but
Ish.
maybe it's appropriate to grunt here and there. I don't know. We can't just dismiss things in, well, maybe we can, but some, at least in some forms of philosophy, I guess we have to engage with them, right? And
Mm.
I want to suggest that Kant is giving us an argument, one that sounds a lot like a rhetorical flourish, but one that has content when we maybe think about what metaphysics is again. Someone want to remind me? I seem
It's
to have.
A
of
study
being.
of being.
Mm.
Yeah. And so, why am I always talking about being? Because I like to read Kant. Um, he says, moreover, however much they may think to make themselves unrecognizable, these are the indifferentists. They're trying to hide their indifference, right? By doing something different.
Mm.
Hiding. They are quickly shutting off and saying, no, I don't. Or we don't have to do metaphysics. There's no need for a count for the connection between these things. No need for a connection between mind and world. We can just study. Um,
Mm.
right? Or we just don't care, right? Like, I mean, that's an
Mm.
indifferentist who bothers to study. They're not that indifferent. But maybe a real indifferentist just sits at home and just lungs up watching TV all day, right? That's cool.
Mm.
Why not that? Sounds pretty fun. I haven't watched TV in a while. Sounds good.
Mm.
That same line, he goes on to say, moreover, however much they may think themselves to make themselves unrecognizable by exchanging the language of the schools for a popular style, these so-called indifferentists, to the extent that they think anything at all, always unavoidably fall back into metaphysical assertions, which they yet profess so much to despise. What's the performative self-contradiction?
There are no
Mm.
metaphysical assertions. You assert
Well,
that there are no metaphysical assertions.
no, that was the first thing that you tried. Try another thing. Remember, I said, yeah, there aren't any. It's fine. We can move along.
To the extent that they think anything at all.
Yeah. What's
It's
the
in
argument?
that reason is metaphysical in a sense. That's the conclusion.
Reason must be metaphysical. That would be the conclusion, I guess, yeah.
Mm.
Why must it be?
Because its object is metaphysical. So reason is of being. Being is yeah. I would need help with the one premise there.
Yeah, you're skipping over the one that you skipped over the last time as well. uh,
Help
PhD
my
and
grunting.
I will do. You're right. Metaphysics is set over being,
Mm.
insofar as the indifferentists think what?
Insofar as the interpretists think they
Anything.
are think
Anything, right?
They must
anything.
There must be a thing.
Yeah. What does a thing have to be something? It has to be. And in order to be anything, or anything is a being. So insofar as they actually think a thing, they're thinking about being,
Yes.
albeit implicitly. So when they
Yeah.
switch, they're not denying that metaphysics is possible. They're even worse.
Mm.
They're not skeptics. The skeptics are the ones that are denying that metaphysics is possible or something like that, or trying to take back the dogmatic thing. They're worse. They just changed the language of their work and then speak in a popular style. They write, I don't know, self-help books, maybe.
Mm.
Uh,
Yeah.
like, I don't know, pseudoscience books, probably. I have no idea what people write
Yeah.
nowadays, but those are the kind of people that I would imagine that Kant has in mind. Sorry.
Anyone who doesn't think deeply enough about their subject.
Or anyone who doesn't say that they are doing something like this indirectly. And the reason is because insofar as they think anything, insofar as that thing is, it is a being. And so they're thinking about being. It's not
Yes.
really laid out
I
as
mean,
well.
this is quite a. I mean, if you think about this, it strikes me that many, a much, we tend to think of metaphysics as reserved to something like Aristotle and maybe the Critique of Pure Reason and such books. But if I take if this is correct, if I'm interpreting what you're saying correctly, it would seem that any sort of serious study of anything, or even serious work of literature, is a work of philosophy, is a work of metaphysics, since it must necessarily, at some level, isolate the object or the statement that it wishes to make in a way that is akin to a metaphysical search. Am I making sense?
Yeah, you
I'm
are. It's actually
globalizing That's what?
you are, and I want to say that you want to avoid it slightly, but I want to say that it's not a bad thought to think that like all subjects are metaphysics. It's actually a problem that Aristotle has to deal with in the metaphysics. Is metaphysics one subject? Is the study of being somehow one, or does it sit over everything? And if it's not one, then how can it be a science? So metaphysics seems to be, there seems to be an element of metaphysics in everything, but metaphysics is itself maybe something separate from everything else. So it somehow is contained in all the other separate sciences, but is
Mm.
itself a separate science that we can study? And it's a really good question to ask Thomas, because when we dogmatically read off the character of being straight away, we might be transgressing the proper boundaries of metaphysics. Maybe metaphysics only has a certain set of objects as its proper objects, and those proper objects might inform the rest of being or every particular being,
Mm.
but is not itself studied or is not itself those beings. So Hegel has this really nice line at some point, and I can't remember where it is, or it might be Heidegger. I can't remember who it is. Doesn't matter at this point. They talk about like being versus a particular being, and even
Mm.
though all particular beings have a relationship to being, being isn't anything because it's not itself a particular being, right? I think it's Hegel's Science of Logic, the opening, where he proves that being is the same as nothing, because it is not any particular being. Uh, so having the relationship between being and beings in mind is important, I think. And then also
Mm.
keeping track that the indifferentists and the skeptics and the dogmatists are all talking about something implicitly. I want to say everybody is always talking about beings, but man, they forget to think about, did anybody ever really stop, pause, and think about being? Right?
Yeah. Sure.
So that's where we are. I think that's like a good place to call it a day, because by, I don't know, by changing or by coming to know being we will be maybe changing all beings by figuring out what
Mm,
beings are and what being is. And so that might be another way of changing the world in a very meaningful sense.
yeah, that's a beautiful full circle there. Yeah, fantastic.
Fantastic, Oaks. All right, gentlemen, sleep tight.
That's pretty.
Well, I mean, not you, Hadley. Dan, you can sleep tight. Hadley, have a good day.
Sure.
Thanks, Tom. But
Ciao, ciao.
yeah, Hadley, that was
That was
awesome.
beautiful.
Thank
That
you.
was beautiful,
Yeah,
Hadley.
Cool.
start to
Yeah.
finish.
Yeah. We'll continue on next week or something and see whether we can get through the preface.
Are you
Yeah.
are we joining each other for Soulful Sundays?
Should be.
Yeah, well,